Nobody in that press room had eaten lunch. That was the joke reporters made to each other afterward, half laughing, half stunned, comparing notes in the parking lot because none of them could quite believe what they'd just watched happen in real time. The Dodgers GM had walked in at noon for what the schedule listed as a routine update. He didn't leave the podium for 90 minutes. By the time he finally stepped away, 3 contracts had been announced. 2 veteran arms had been released. A new face had walked through the clubhouse doors before the ink on his deal was even dry. And the number that kept appearing on every cheer-in, every push notification, every frantic group chat among baseball reporters trying to keep pace. $350 million. In one announcement. One sitting. One press conference that started as routine and ended as the single most expensive afternoon in franchise history. "We don't do things halfway around here," the GM said, almost as an afterthought, somewhere near the end of it all, when the room had stopped gasping long enough to let him finish a sentence. "Today, we didn't do anything halfway." He started with the hardest part. Experienced executives almost always do, deliver the news that will generate resistance before the room has time to build anticipation around something else. Effective today, Blake Snell has been released from the organization. The room went still. Snell wasn't just any pitcher. He was a 2-time Cy Young winner, a name the Dodgers had committed nearly $200 million to less than 2 years earlier, a piece the entire rotation had been quietly built around when healthy. He hadn't been healthy nearly enough. The GM didn't dress up the explanation. This wasn't about talent. This was about us needing a roster that can be relied on, start to start, week to week. We've made our peace with the financial reality of this decision. Before the room had absorbed that, he delivered the second name. Tyler Glasnow has also been released. A second jolt. Glasnow, explosive when on the mound, sidelined more often than the organization had hoped when they committed to him years earlier. 2 of the most talented arms in the sport, gone from the roster in the same breath, within the same minute. The GM let the silence hang for a moment before he continued. "These are not decisions we made lightly. But they are decisions that allow us to do what comes next." What came next arrived in rapid succession, the kind of news cycle that doesn't give a room time to fully process one signing before the next is already on the table. The first was a left-handed pitcher arriving from Boston on a 2-year contract, a deal that, on its surface, looked almost modest compared to what would follow, but that reporters in the room immediately recognized as a calculated, value-driven acquisition. A pitcher with something to prove, joining a rotation desperate for exactly his skill set, at a price that left significant financial room for what was still coming. "We've watched him for 2 years, the GM said. "We think there's another level there. We're betting on it." The second signing landed heavier. A frontline arm, a number that made several reporters visibly check their phones to confirm they'd heard the figure correctly. The kind of contract that reshapes a rotation's identity overnight, not a complementary piece, but a centerpiece. And the third, an infielder. Defensive instincts that scouts had been raving about for years, the kind of glove that changes the calculus of an entire infield, paired with a bat that had quietly improved each of the last 3 seasons without ever quite getting the national attention it deserved. 3 signings. 3 separate press releases that, in a normal week, would each have been the headline on their own. Combined into a single afternoon, a single podium, a single number that the entire baseball world would spend the rest of the day trying to fully comprehend. $350 million. It would have been enough on its own. A historic afternoon of business, 2 releases, 3 signings, a number large enough to dominate headlines for a week regardless of anything else. But it was the final question, almost an afterthought near the end of the press conference, that turned the story into something the rest of the league would be talking about for months. A reporter asked, simply, "Was Ohtani involved in any of this?" The GM paused. Not the pause of someone caught off guard, the pause of someone deciding how much to share about something that mattered more than the transactions themselves. "Shohei reached out to our new infielder personally before the deal was finalized," he said. He wanted him to know what this organization is, beyond the numbers. I think that mattered in the decision. The room shifted again. It was a detail that, in isolation, might have passed quietly. But layered onto an afternoon already defined by its scale, it reframed everything that had happened. This wasn't simply a front office spending aggressively. This was an organization being actively shaped, its newest, most significant additions personally courted by the player who had become, in every sense, the face and the gravitational center of the franchise. He arrived at his introductory press conference still visibly adjusting to the speed of everything that had happened to him in the span of a single day. Asked what convinced him to sign, he didn't reach for the practiced language that usually accompanies these moments, the talk of championship windows and organizational philosophy and historical track record. Honestly? The call from Shohei, he said. I've played against him. I've seen what he does on the field. But the call, that was different. That told me what kind of room I was walking into. He was asked about the pressure of joining a roster reshaped this dramatically in a single afternoon, stepping into a clubhouse that had just watched two established veterans walk out the door as he walked in. I'm not trying to replace anybody, he said carefully. I'm trying to add something. That's all I can control. By evening, the analysis had already begun in earnest, the comparisons to past spending sprees, the debates about whether releasing two former Cy Young caliber arms made financial sense even with the dead money attached, the projections about how a rotation and infield reshaped this dramatically might perform once the dust settled. But underneath the financial analysis sat a simpler, more human thread that kept resurfacing throughout the day. An organization had made one of its most significant single-day moves in franchise history. And at the center of it, not officially, not through any formal title or authority, but unmistakably, was a player whose influence had quietly grown to include not just what happened on the field, but who the people around him would be. The GM closed the press conference with a final comment, almost offhand, as reporters were already packing up their equipment. This roster is different today than it was yesterday. I think it's better. We'll find out together.